Visiting another country can be an eye-opening and rewarding experience, but how about moving to another country? Well, I happen to have quite a lot of experience in that area. I am originally from the US, but I've moved to a handful of different countries around the world. So as a seasoned country switching pro, I thought I'd just chime in and share a little bit of my experience moving to other countries. And in this video, I'll be going over what I see as the basics of what it takes to move to another country. I've moved to Spain and I've moved to Germany. And I've also moved for shorter periods to a few different places in South America and Europe. Each time I had a pretty different set of reasons for moving, and different requirements had to be met to go to each of those countries. And it is definitely worth noting that there's countries out there like Malta or St. Lucia where you can pretty much just show up, and if you have hundreds of thousands of dollars in your bank account, you can basically get citizenship and stay there for as long as you want. But if you don't have that kind of money saved up, or none of those countries are the country that you want to move to, then in my experience, moving to another country does mean jumping through a number of hoops. But the country that I currently reside in does happen to be Germany. Ja, Deutschland. So even though I do spend a large amount of my time traveling in other countries that aren't Germany, this is where I'm based, and it's also what's freshest in my mind when it comes to moving to another country. So as a part of my experience moving here to Germany, there's been things like finding a job, signing up for a university program, and dealing with bureaucracy. And let me tell you, Germany is a big fan of bureaucracy. There's a ton of it here. So rather than boring you with examples of myself here in Germany, camping out overnight to get a government document or anything like that, I'll just put it simply and say that don't expect the process of moving to any other country to be quite as simple as it seems at first. And within the context of things not really always being that simple, the fact of the matter is that almost every other country in the world is not going to have the same native language as you. It doesn't even matter what your native language is. If you speak English as your native language, you definitely have a head start, because English is definitely the most common language of international business throughout the world. But that does not mean that on the ground in any country that's not a native English-speaking country, you will really be able to get around with English necessarily at all. So when moving to another country, the chances are greatest that you're going to need to learn another language. Based on my experience having learned a few other languages, if you've already learned one other language, this probably isn't that unfathomable. But the thing is, many places around the world are quite monolingual, and if you're from the US like me, and maybe never had a great opportunity to thoroughly learn another language in school, it might be a little bit of an uphill battle. I can say for sure that my Spanish, took a lot longer to learn than German. And honestly, experts in language learning would usually say that German should take significantly longer than Spanish to learn for a native English speaker. Basically, I started to learn German before I even moved to Germany with some free language learning materials online. And then when I finally got to Germany, I knew a lot of the basics, I understood the grammar, but then I actually had to talk to people. So it took a little while to actually really know German. But if I hadn't spent a lot of time learning German before moving to Germany, it would have been a real setback when moving here. Like, I'm talking 6 months or a year of going to language courses, and as a result, probably not having enough time to work somewhere full time. But we will talk a little bit more about working in another country in just a minute, so hold your horses. The other thing about moving to Germany is that I had to save up quite some money to move here. I moved here originally as a student, which meant I had to have like 8,000 or maybe 9,000 euros saved up at the time. I think it's more like 10,000 something now. The exact details really don't matter unless you're planning to move to Germany as a student too. What does matter is that moving to any other country in the world means that you need to have some money. And that brings us to another really important point when it comes to moving to another country. To move to another country successfully, you have to figure out a sustainable financial situation right off the bat. There is the problem that you literally might not be allowed to stay for an extended period of time in another country without proving that you have funds. But aside from that, just the cost of moving to another country is probably going to be higher than it is moving within your own country. Even if you make your move 100% DIY like I tend to do, it still costs a significant amount of money. So at minimum, you'd have the costs of moving your stuff, the stuff that you really just can't live without. But on top of just the costs of moving the stuff that you already have, you're probably going to have to get rid of some stuff and then get some or a lot of new stuff when you move to another country. Of course, every time anybody moves to a different country, the situation will be slightly different. Maybe you know somebody in that new country that you're moving to and they can give you some furniture for free or something like that, or you have family there, whatever. But regardless of those kind of details, there's going to be at least a couple $1,000s of costs, if not upwards of $10,000. But you didn't hear me wrong before when I said it should probably be a sustainable financial situation. If you just get up and move to another country without a job, I don't know, say you quit your job back home, you move to another country, and hope that maybe there you will find a job eventually, What happens if, for whatever reason, it becomes a real struggle to find a job in that new country? If you have something like your own freelance business that you can move to another country with, it's probably going to be a lot simpler. But even then, there are sure to be differences between operating that business out of your home country versus operating it out of a different country. In Germany, the main differences I've found are that taxes can be higher here than most of the rest of the world, and there's quite a lot of bureaucracy. But it really can differ quite a lot from country to country. The only thing that's for sure is that each country has its own set of rules that you'll have to get to know really well and follow. Basically, if you're dreaming of being a digital nomad that gets to hang out on the beach all day and work for like 2 hours, that's probably not going to be reality in most places. Well, obviously not in Germany, just because I wouldn't want to hang out on that cold beach next to the Nordsee or the Ostsee all day. But let's take a step back for a second, because the truth is that you can't just get up and go anywhere and work there, especially without a visa. I mean, depending on what nationality or nationalities you have, you might be able to go to another country and work there without any special paperwork. That, for example, is one of the things that's really nice for EU citizens here. If you're from Germany and you want to go work in Poland, it's no problem. But for most of the world's nationalities moving to most of the world's countries, this just isn't the case, and you're going to need the right to work in the form of a visa. The details of actually getting a visa can vary from relatively simple to extremely complex. When I moved to Spain, like somewhere around 10 years ago now, I actually had to go to the embassy in Washington, D.C. and get my visa there. It was not possible to get it after I had already arrived in Spain. But in Germany, the situation was a little bit different. Actually, a little bit better in my opinion, because I could just show up here and then apply for the right to work or study here after already entering the country. Again, this differs a lot from country to country, but if you were wanting to move to, I don't know where, Japan, let's say, you might actually have to get a Japanese company to hire you before even moving there. I mean, there is the reality in some countries of it being incredibly complex to move a business to those countries. But if you don't have your own business to use and you're, say, I don't know, an IT professional or a marketing specialist, and you're not planning to start your own business in those third countries, then you're going to need to work for a business that's based in the country that you're moving to. And in many cases, you simply will not be allowed the permission to work in another country without having first found a job there. And don't forget, there's that language thing involved. Like we were talking about Japan earlier. If you want to get a job at a Japanese company, unless it's a very rare occasion for some kind of specialist in another language, and even in that situation, honestly, you're probably going to need to know pretty decent Japanese. And then once you spent tons of time studying a new language and figuring out how to actually move to that new country, there's going to be taxes there. I mean, it's a great feeling when you've figured out how you can have a sustainable income in the country that you want to live in. But taxation when you're the national of one country and living in another country can get pretty complex. And it gets a whole lot more complex if your nationality is from the USA. The United States of America is one of the only countries in the world that taxes you based on your nationality rather than your place of residence. So there's a real chance that you could actually have to pay taxes to two countries by living in another country. But luckily there is a way around that. It just doesn't work in every single country around the world. But many countries, like Germany, have an agreement with the US to avoid double taxation. So if you're earning under a certain amount of money per year, I think it's like $120,000 or so this year, then you won't have to pay taxes in the US if you're paying them, for example, in Germany. But even if you're not from the US and you're watching this, you're going to have to learn about a new tax system and probably pay some money to some kind of tax professional to help you file your taxes in that new tax system. And don't forget that to deal with money in another country, you're probably going to need a bank account in that country too. And that can be a little complicated when you're not from that country. And again, I'm really sorry, Americans, but this is especially hard for you because a lot of banks, for example, here in Germany, don't even want to open bank accounts for Americans. And this is simply because the United States requires banks in other countries to share information with them, and not every bank is set up to do that. So the whole situation with getting a bank account opened up can differ a lot between countries, but I do have to say that it was kind of the same situation in Spain. Not every bank would let me open an account. But on the upside, there are a lot of online banks around the world now, and I find that they often make it a little bit easier for foreigners to open up a bank account. One online bank that I found particularly useful in a lot of different countries these days is Revolut, and I do have an affiliate link down in the description if you're interested in opening up an account with them. But just a word of warning, I'm only talking about my own experience here with both banks and taxes, so if you're looking for a professional, reach out to a tax advisor or a bank. Another thing that's definitely a basic when it comes to moving to another country is, in addition to having a long-term sustainable financial situation figured out, you've got to have a place to live figured out too. And just booking a long-term stay on a website like Airbnb or something is usually not really the best solution. I mean, when I moved to Germany back in 2017, I did spend a few months living in a place that was more expensive than it should have been, just because that was the only place that I could get before I had even entered the country, and I wanted to have something figured out just to move into. But for me, at least, having a slightly overpriced place set up to live for a few months rather than like a few days meant I had enough time to leisurely find a good place to live in the long term. But generally, a solid long-term living situation is going to mean that you're going to have to go on the ground and actually go visit some apartments and stuff like that, and really find a place that you want to live for a price that you want to pay for a long period of time. Of course, another solution, if you have the funds, is to just buy the place that you want to live. But regardless of if you're planning to rent or buy a home in another country, it's probably going to be much easier to do if you're on the ground in that country already. And just going back on that topic of knowing the local language, here in Germany, I would not have found a good place to live if I didn't speak German. I mean, no matter where you go to live, there is most likely the option of paying a local to help you out. It definitely might be useful to do something like that if you need to have a really quick transition. But in the long term, learning the local language is for sure the way to go everywhere. And one other thing that I'd really consider when moving to another country is just what your social life is going to look like in that country. I mean, it definitely makes a difference if you're planning to move to that country alone or maybe with a friend or family member. But when getting up and moving to another country, just ask yourself the question, how easy is it going to be to have a new social life in this particular country that I'm looking at moving to? I've personally traveled to something over 70 countries now, and I can say for sure that there are good people everywhere that you can make friends with. But just know that social and cultural norms will differ a lot everywhere in the world. I mean, personally, when I go back and visit the US, I kind of like have small talk with all different kinds of people, many of whom I've never met in my life and I'll never see again. Here in Germany, that's just not a thing. But really the best solution here is to do some research on social norms and cultural norms in the country that you're looking at moving to. And the last thing I want to go over here is really just the benefit to moving to another country, honestly. Just like with any kind of travel, I mean, even when you're just visiting a place for 1 week, the chance to live in another country is the chance to experience something new. Although I've only actually lived long-term in a handful of the countries that I've visited, each of them has offered a really unique experience that is really the same thing that you get out of any kind of travel. You could call it more like slow travel if you want. I mean, Germany is the country outside of the US that I've lived in the longest, but I still feel kind of like I'm traveling when I'm here, even though I'd say I'm quite integrated into the society here by now. There is just something really fulfilling and enlightening, honestly, about spending months or even years in a place that you're not from. So I think that when you show up to another country with the intention to live there, having that kind of mentality, an open mentality where you're interested in learning about the culture, about the social norms, adapting, but also keeping your own culture as well, that really will play a big role when it comes to guaranteeing that overall you have a positive experience by moving to another country. But no matter your reasons for wanting to try out living in another country, I do wish you luck. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. And also, if you have some experience living in another country yourself, let us know about your experience down below in the comments too. As I hope I made pretty clear at the beginning of the video, this is not like any kind of comprehensive guide to moving to any other country in the world or anything like that. These are just what I've found to be the basics of moving to another country after living in a few different countries myself. But thank you so much for watching this video, and if you found it useful or just interesting to watch, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Oh yeah, by the way, if I did happen to spark your interest in Germany, I do have an array of other videos about this country that you can watch right now on YouTube for free.